Good morning, everyone. And as Mark has introduced the pigeonhole, you've got a QR code, I think, coming up on your screen in a second. We do encourage you to get involved in this conversation. We have about an hour for me to chat with my guests, and we will chat a little bit and then also have you participate in this panel discussion as well with your questions. So if you sort of put your questions into the pigeonhole, I've got a trusted iPad here in my hand. I'll be able to sort of feed your questions in there, right? So I think, Wei Li, gentlemen, welcome. Maybe we'll just kick off the discussion a little bit and talk a little bit about the issues that Wei Li has kind of brought up. But I think I want to sort of start the conversation hearing from each of you. As we've talked about COVID, a lot has changed for everyone, right? It was a transformation. It was a crisis of a generation, as we've all heard. In terms of risk management, how do you think the risk landscape has changed since COVID, and how has that sort of evolved today? Maybe just get a few opening thoughts. Greg, we'll start with you, shall we?
Certainly. I think if I were to, sort of identify some of the big picture themes, business continuity planning, which we've already heard about this morning, was certainly one of the risks that different charities and different IPCs had to navigate in a more acute way in the pandemic year and the aftermath, because there were existential questions that needed to be raised and perhaps even a recalibration of what is core. And then linked to that is the digitalization risks that are involved. As charities had to pivot online in order to ensure that the services would carry on for the sake of their beneficiaries. And of course, there are other related things. For example, the way employees worked, the way that we all learned to work from home, which has revolutionized our employment.
Okay, on that note, I'm just going to let the sound panel know that we're having a little bit of trouble hearing ourselves on the stage. So I'm just going to give them a chance to adjust this. Sort of, Tim, come into the picture. From your perspective, in the operations point of view, where do you see the risk landscape changing today?
Sorry, I can't hear very clearly.
Yeah, so just to give the sound panel a bit of heads up, we have a problem with the fallback. We can't really hear ourselves. Tim, try for that.
From an NKF perspective, when I see risk, we see the positive and the negative side of it. The negative side was the supply chain and a lot of shortages and a lot of issues. But the positive side is what have we learned from all these negatives? And I think we have learned a lot in terms of supply chain, diversifying our suppliers. Some of our suppliers no longer exist after COVID, and how do we move on from there? Workforce was the other issue. After COVID, there's a question of how do you bring in more people? And we had to understand what was local and what was foreign in terms of the issues we challenged ourselves with. The other issue we have is even our physical structure. How do you redesign your centers? Because we learned from COVID that some of the centers were no longer viable in terms of how it was designed, and we had to replan everything. So that's how we looked at risk.
Indeed. I'll bring Hean into the conversation. Where do you stand on this whole idea of where the risk landscape has changed?
Sorry, I couldn't hear.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Still having an issue with the audio. So where do you stand in this question about how the risk landscape has changed since COVID?
Okay, I just reflect on the theme for today's conference, from purpose to practice and impact. So I think the lesson from COVID-19 is really a lesson in risk management. And as we reflect on the theme for today, we talk about moving to practice. So as we talk about risk management through the COVID-19 period, that was a very good instance where you put into practice whatever ideas and theories that you may have. regarding risk management. So I think from that period, I'm sure different charities would have gained valuable lessons as to how you can gear your organization to be flexible and be capable of handling any situation that may arise. I suppose if we look at it, there are a few, maybe 3 key areas that we are talking about. One is in relation to work systems and processes. As you see from COVID-19, there is a need to make drastic changes to the way we operate. The work processes are different. We had social distancing, we had mask wearing, and certain procedures have to be dramatically changed. So the ability to reconfigure our processes according to the needs and the demands that we face, that's something which I believe is a necessary capability for all of us. And secondly, if you look at the digital transformation that came about due to COVID-19, we know that IT is a great enabler. And certainly, as the threat of COVID-19 recedes, we continue to leverage on IT. But at the same time, I think we are reminded that IT also carries with it certain risks. And therefore, as you make use of IT, you do have to take care of the IT security risks. And because in today's operations, a lot of our data are sitting in IT systems. And some of us are sitting on a gold mine of data. And it is incumbent on us to make sure that the systems are well protected. And my last point is about the human factor. And really, through COVID-19, as we talk about changes in processes, changes in systems, at the end of the day, it is the human factor that matters. Do we have people who are willing to change, people who are willing to step up and make changes, be it at the board level, at the management level, or at the frontline level? This is certainly a most critical factor to make sure that our organizations continue to be viable.
Okay, Hean, I'm going to jump in there for a second and just maybe change the topic a little bit and talk about the hottest topic that we're hearing today, anti-money laundering, right? I think that's been very much in the news, as we all know, in a very, very big amount case that's in the news. But in terms of the charity sector, I just wonder from the point of view of the panelists here, how do you think charities are equipped to handle challenges of anti-money laundering, in your view today? Maybe Wei-Li, I'll get you to start, and then we'll go around the block with the gentleman.
So the question is, how are charities equipped to manage anti-money laundering? Okay, for audiences, in case you are wondering why the panelists look a little bit puzzled, because all of us cannot hear what Melvin is trying to ask us.
We can't actually hear each other on the stage.
Yeah, so basically, as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, anti-money laundering risk is not new. So when in 2016, when we administered the survey, this risk was already been highlighted by charities. Likewise, in 2023, this continued to be a top concern across the different charities. So what Charity Council have done is, obviously, last year, they have also issued a toolkit on terrorism financing to assist charities when it comes to making sure that when it comes to knowing your donor, do we have a process internally to at least do our due diligence to understand where our donors come from, where our donations are from. So this is at least a very basic step that we see. So obviously, as part of, as a consultant, when we provide some advisory services to charities, we will not use the standard that we see in financial institutions. It will be primarily targeted at charity itself. So like I mentioned or repeated, the baseline is, do you know your donor? That's one. Secondly, it's the way that we spend our money. Do we know where are we going to? So these are the two sources that we always think it's important when it comes to AML itself. So maybe I pass the mic to, as I go down the list, to Gregory on his comment.
So Greg, I'd like to hear from your perspective this same question on how do you think charities are equipped today to handle anti-money laundering? Maybe speak from your perspective in the Charity Council.
Yeah, thanks. I think this is really a very hot topic, and we've had a very well-attended seminar recently, and Commissioner of Charities was speaking. Pro Bono SG, that I'm privileged to lead, was also supporting. And I won't, of course, cover the huge ground that was covered there in terms of, the various kind of examples. But it's definitely been burnt, I think, and reinforced in our consciousness with the materially large sums that has, basically become the feature of news. And the hope is, even though as Wei Li has rightly pointed out, this is not a new risk. It is not something that we are grappling with for the first time. It has been there, and there are systems that I believe our charities on the whole have put in place together with finance committee, audit committees, also playing their role, and also personnel. It's a heightened awareness that I think will hopefully cause an improvement and enhancement of practices when we deal with large sums, when we deal with cash donations being given, when red flags can be identified by charities in terms of what are some of the warnings, the identity of the donor and the identity of the payer being different. How do we develop this? How do we develop this type of culture and best practices and continue to do our learning? I don't think that the last seminar that was organized, even though it was very well attended, more than 1,000 people, is the be-all and end-all. I think it's the start of a conversation, and it will continue. And even as we speak, I know a number of us here from the charity sector are probably trying to address real-life questions about this. When, for example, a donor may have received a lawyer's letter, and what is the ripple effect that flows from that in terms of a knock-on consequence? Can there be a risk of clawback? Did you do a due diligence? Did you ask the right questions? So I think we go back to a KYD point that Wei Li raised.
Okay, I'll come to the KYD point in a second, but let's hear from Tim. From your operational point of view, how well do you think charities are equipped today to deal with money laundering?
From an operational perspective, I think it's a hard call for charities to know every dollar that comes to us. I think one is more important is, do we know our partners? Do we know why they're giving to us? And I think the point of relevancy is also there. Do we have synergy between why they're giving to us and what we do with their money? I think this is where we have to know our donors. And we will go even further to look at volunteers, because volunteers can turn to donors and donors can turn to volunteers. We need to know all our partners. Sometimes from a charity's perspective, we get desperate. We are always going after donations, and we miss the forest for the trees. And I think this is a time where we need to know who we are working with. I think when COVID came, a lot of us went online. And that actually opened another door for issues about, do we know the people who are donating to us online? And this is where we are now playing catch-up, where a lot of people were donating to us online. How do we reach out to them? How do we connect with them? And I think that's one of the issues we are struggling with post-COVID in terms of how. And if you ask my staff, they said, I only have 8 hours in a day. How do you want me to track everybody that crosses the line and give us money? They all mean well. The question is, how far do we have to go to assure the board that everyone is doing for the right reasons?
Okay, because we do have a question from the audience on this very issue, but before I sort of screen this question, get Hean to come in very quickly. How well do you think charities are equipped to handle money laundering? Just very quickly on this point.
Yeah. Okay, I think charities do have to conduct due diligence when it comes to donations that they receive. And this is regardless of whether the charity is a big or small charity. And there are really 3 things you should remember. 1 is the people, 2, the money itself, and 3, the event. By people, I mean, what do you know about the donor? And what do you know about the persons associated with the donor? Who recommended him, for example? Is he related to your board member, your staff, or your partnering organizations? What do you know about the person? Does everything looks all right, or does something, as you look at it, is there any red flag that is triggered? Secondly, the money. What do you know about the money? Is the money coming straight into your account? Is it coming through some other corporate vehicle? Is it personal? Is it cash? Is it wire transfer? Or maybe it's cryptocurrency that they're giving you. So what do you know about the money? And does everything, does it look all right? Or does it trigger any suspicions in your mind? And then thirdly, the event. Was there any event or any transaction that prompted this proposed donation? Do you know, did anything happen before this person came forward to you? Is anything going to happen after they donate to you? What do you know about the event? And it is a combination of these 3 that you look through the information that you gather, make an assessment as to whether there's anything that is a bit off or suspicious, and that's how you do due diligence.
Okay, to a question that we just raised about know your donor, right? I think Greg mentioned this and also Tim mentioned this. I guess in the context of the charity, as Tim has mentioned, COVID changed a lot. A lot has gone online and makes it even more difficult for charities to understand who the donors might be. I guess there's always the question between a risk-based approach and what you actually need to screen. Because you mentioned your staff may have 8 hours a day, how much do you screen? So the question is more in general, where do charities find the balance in this whole idea of knowing your donor? How much do you screen? How much do you apply a risk-based approach? Where do you find the balance? Maybe, Greg, you can come into the picture first.
Yes, so I think it's navigating that balance that is where all the practical dilemmas are for us, and you know, in the sense of I think you know, trying to do enough to ask the right questions and to be able to identify what are some of the red flags which lead you to ask those questions. And it's all about really risk identification as far as that donation is concerned. And then, of course, it's also to understand whether it's a materially large sum, you know, that you're receiving. Do you know enough, even if it's an online donor? And there, you know, sometimes it's delicate. Having, you know, led charities for a while now, you know, historically, we also know there are some donors that don't want the profile, that prefer to be anonymous. They don't even want to attend a donor appreciation, but they're happy to support you for the quiet work. So you've got to balance that too. But in the current milieu, I think the pendulum has swung more towards greater alertness and awareness about risk in this area. You don't want to be in a position where you're going to be the subject of a criminal investigation, or you're going to face a lawyer's letter asking for clawback of sums that have not been disbursed. So your antenna needs to be up, really. And it will be up when you attend, sessions like this, when you attend, some of the training sessions that have been put together by COC. And, basically from there, hopefully you'll get a better sense of what to do. If in doubt, why don't you ask a professional? Why don't you ask your AC? Why don't you ask your board? If in doubt, I think it doesn't hurt you to ask questions on what you need to do, because in that multitude of counselors, hopefully there is some kind of safety net in terms of approach.
Okay, Tim, come on in.
I will still go back to don't be desperate. And I'll tell my staff, as much as we need donation, we really need donation, be prepared to turn them away if you are uncomfortable. And honestly, a lot of my staff have been around and they can sense if a donor is genuine. So amount is important, the purpose is important, and sometimes my colleagues will also tell me the person doesn't know what we are doing and they're donating to us, and that's where alarm bells go off. And there are times where there are strings attached to that donation, and this is where another alarm bell goes. So innocently, they may be you think it's innocently giving you a donation. Later on, they will refer you to their company who's selling this or selling that or want you to buy that. And this is where alarm bells will go off. And this is where I think you need to empower your staff. You need to empower your staff to say, thank you, but no. And this is important because we place KPIs on our staff on how much donations to raise, and that sometimes forces them to react and respond just because they have goals to meet. So this is where I feel as an organization, I think the donation is important, the relationship with the donor is important. We need to protect them in terms of confidentiality. And sometimes when we do too much checking, it may actually bounce back against us in the sense that they found out that you don't really trust me or you don't want to have a positive relationship with the donor, and that actually have many ripple effects to their friends and their network.
I'm going to bring Hean into the conversation. I know your background is very much in enforcement before, but when you look at this issue about knowing your donor, right? And we're talking about screening. In your view, how do you think charities can do this better? Maybe, employing technology, employing some sort of new methodology, or how do you see things?
Yeah, I will still go back to what I mentioned just now about due diligence. And I will certainly echo what Tim mentioned just now about red flags and indicators that may indicate to you that proposed donation may be something suspicious and maybe something which you want to steer away from. So as you look at the proposed donation and you ask yourself about the persons involved, the money and the event, you ask yourself, how likely is it that this donation is offered in good faith? As Tim mentioned, if the donor does not even know much about your business, the charity business you're in, then does that raise a red flag? So how likely is it that this donation is offered in good faith, or is there something attached behind that proposed donation? And of course, in addition to that, you also have to ask yourself, are you prepared to manage the fallout and the consequences if you take this donation in when you have some question mark and something wrong happens? Are you prepared to handle the consequences? Is it going to be a hit on your reputation? Is it going to impact future donation streams? Is it going to affect the services that you render to your beneficiaries. So what kind of a scale of impact are you prepared to manage? And of course, some large charities, or for that matter, if you look at the corporate world, big businesses, of course, they have the resources to engage commercial services and also engage some data analytics tools to help them sift through and help them come to a more well-considered decision. Maybe in the charity space, there may be limited opportunities, but the kind of thinking process that we have is going to be key. It is the human assessment that we have, the due diligence that we do that will ultimately help us in this process.
You talked about technology, and Greg, I'll let you come in a second, but it's a question that's actually being asked by our audience here. I think we can see this live now. How do you think AI is going to affect the whole risk management process for charities? Maybe, Hean, you can come in on this, and then I'll ask Greg to chime in because he probably has a point of view as well.
Your question was about how...
The question is there, how do you think AI technology is going to affect charities in managing risk?
Yeah, I suppose when charities look at managing risk, we ought to look at learning from each other. And occasion and conference like this is an excellent opportunity as well. We learn from each other because each organization may face certain challenges. Each organization may encounter different incidents. And it doesn't mean that if today you are not affected by a particular event or incident, it may well mean that you'll be affected tomorrow. So if another organization has gone through certain event or incident, then we ought to proactively learn what they have gone through. So the same would apply when we look at the use of technology and AI. It's really about learning from the totality of what is going on. If we have a way and if we are able to combine resources, then certainly if there are good collection of knowledge databases that tell us what has gone on, what incidents have occurred, what lessons are learned, all these valuable knowledge databases is going to be a source of learning for every one of us. And if we collect the knowledge, then the question is, how do we draw the insights? And how can we more effectively harness the learning from all that everybody has gone through? And that's where I think AI and big data analysis can come in. Certainly, if you have the AI agent and the AI agent can understand a profile of a particular charity and then looks at what has gone on, and then through that process offer the organization some of the areas that maybe they ought to look out for, or offer some of the ideas as to what can be done with regard to specific scenarios.
Okay.
So I think that certainly is a way forward.
Okay, I'll get Wei Li into the conversation.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, when we look at risk, we always look at risk at two lenses. It's the upside and downside. So to me, adoption of the AI is the upside risk. It's just like what Minister have highlighted, digitalization and innovation is part of our strategy and part of upside risk. So I definitely will encourage the proactive use of AI and technology to enhance the way that we do things. Very importantly, it's like just now in my presentation, I also highlighted resource constraint. So perhaps with the adoption of AI, where we get ChatGPT to do all our PowerPoints, we ask ChatGPT how do we address, like just now I think there was a question on what are the mitigating measurements for relevancy risk. Maybe as a start, we can ask ChatGPT, what are some of the mitigating measurements to help us in this? So this is what we meant by looking at risk from the upside angle. But on the other hand, when we look at risk from a downside, which is the compliance, which is the privacy issue, we also need to be very mindful of, obviously with AI, with technology, we also talk about like potential bridges in terms of our data, privacy, as well as compliance issue later on. But in the context of Singapore, rest assured, the law has not catch up with us yet. So please try to use it as much as possible, like what I mentioned, seize the opportunity now.
I was going to bring the lawyer into the conversation. Greg, you were about to pick up the mic before I asked Hean the earlier question. Did you just want to add a perspective here?
Yes, actually, I was going to add on, I think, to the points made by my colleague, and then I'll go straight into the AI tech. I just wanted to make the point about AML CFT that the other risk that I think is forgotten in that equation when we analyze, these questions of large sum donations that come to the charity and do we receive or do we not receive? Do we look a gift horse in the mouth? Is really the reputation risk for the charity. And I think that's something that in the buckets that Wei presented and various points as well, I think we should bear in mind as well. Because the last thing you want is to be in a position where, because you haven't done your checks and because you're looking at a shortcut, you want to try and achieve a KPI for your own organization. You achieve this goal, you're happy, it's a large sum. But then you end up in a situation where the charity is dragged into disrepute because it makes the national headlines for all the wrong reasons. But coming back to AI and tech, and this is a loaded question, there's so many things one can talk about, artificial intelligence or augmented intelligence, and then I think ChatGPT, which is generative AI. I think the question of managing risks can be both positive or negative. There is the mitigation point that Wei mentioned, which is important in helping you to mitigate risks. There is a very critical scanning piece that needs to be borne in mind because I think with AI, and big data that's already been touched on, can you have some kind of aggregated data that helps you to analyze in a sharper way your donors, so you know where most of your donations are coming from, and can that lead to more intelligent fundraising? Or likewise, if you have enough, sort of data about your beneficiaries, you might also be able to develop some nuanced programs that could impact that group better. So I see it as really how we harness it. It's not going to replace us humans, but it's really how we work intelligently with artificial intelligence.
Tim.
I think from an operational perspective, it's a tool. I think it's a question of asking the right question before you go and embark on AI. Because I think we're putting the cart before the horse. If you don't know why you're looking at AI and then you just implement it. We collect a lot of data. If we don't even know why we're collecting the data, what can it be used for? AI is just going to be a white elephant in that room. And people get disgruntled, the staff will, I do all this work, what do I get out of it? So AI, to me, I think honestly, for the charity sector, is still at an infancy. We are trying in our own small ways to encourage the staff to be more open in sharing data, working together, and using data in some of our smaller projects to show positive outcomes. And I think with that, then we can embark on larger AI projects to look at other risks. And I think one of the early projects we use is as simple as CRM. You put a lot of data in, and how do you check, and how do you distill the type of donors you get, or even there are conflicts of interest in terms of patients and other related matters.
Okay, I'm going to come away from the technology equation, move on to the other issue about climate and ESG. I think Wei presented some of the issues about ESG, adoption, how that affects charities and earlier. Wei, maybe you come into the picture first. From your perspective, both as an observer of the charity sector, and also perhaps how you serve in charities as well. Do you think charities can learn from the private sector in terms of ESG practices, climate practices?
Okay, I go back to my earlier presentation when it comes to ESG, especially the conversation on S. I believe the listed companies should learn from charities and not the other way. Yeah, because this is what all of us have been doing for the many years. In terms of measuring of social impact, you think the listed companies are better than us in measuring that? I don't think so. I think the charity sector have to lead, especially when it comes to social impact, this one. Secondly, when it comes to governance space, again, when it comes to this particular topic, we talk about diversity as one of the big conversation under ESG governance. So as compared to listed company, obviously I have to say that the charities actually did much better than the listed company when it comes to the profile or the representation of gender itself, as well as diversity in terms of the background and experience. You guys actually did, do actually much better than them. But what I think we can learn a little bit from them, from listed company or other corporates, I think it's on the more of the data collection, the data validation process, and also like the earlier conversation in terms of the quicker adoption of technology to help us to consolidate or to analyze data. So this is something that perhaps, not because we don't want to do it, but I think it's also because of resource constraint. So that's the thing that I feel it's area for us to consider the quicker adoption of technology itself. Then I also come from a very practical ground, because question being asked is, are we expected to implement ESG the same? When you look at the element of the E, I go back to very basic on energy and water consumption. We all know that energy cost is only going one-way track, higher and higher and higher, which means that ultimately you have a huge implication to our operation itself. Obviously, it'll be a very relevant and important topic to all of us here. So that is one of my reasons, or one of the explanations that I always give charities, especially those that I'm serving as a board member, to say that, look, don't look at ESG as just a green movement or a movement that the Singapore government trying to push. Look at it more from us as an organization. How do we practically survive going forward? So this is, my encouragement back to the charity to look at ESG from a practical angle, but also to knock on the doors of Charity Council and everyone for assistance when it comes to template and reporting later on. Let's minimize the jargon of requirements, hopefully, going forward. Yeah.
Well, that's a nice segue to go to Greg. Still on this question I've just put on the screen, and it's related. It's really about the idea of whether charity sector should implement ESG with the same vigor, in the same passion, I guess, as the listed companies, because the listed companies, of course, will be governed by things like listing rules and other, regulations by the regulators. But the charity sector, although parts of it are regulated, but this whole idea about whether ESG should be practiced in the same way, where do you stand on this?
So I'll add my own, perspectives as well. Firstly, I fully agree with Wei Li that there is a lot that the private or listed entities can learn from the charity sector. I'm very privileged to be under two very strong women leaders, Anita Pham of NCSS and also Teresa Goh of Charity Council. And it's a master class to see them and to see the team discuss topics that relate to the S. And I feel that there is much that the private or listed entities can learn from the charity sector and the maturation that we're at today. Conversely, I think there are aspects of E that we need to learn, and possibly even G. And I think part of the impetus for change would be, the revised Code of Governance and Principle 3. The charity acts responsibly, fairly, and with integrity. And, essentially in that principle, we need to take into consideration ESG factors when coordinating or conducting the charities activities. So hopefully that will seep into the consciousness of charities. It will be on our radar. It will be a matter for board discussion. It will be a matter for board retreat, intentional planning. And the hope is that we will see a continued growth. As for now, I'm not sure it's the same vigor or rigor as far as the E and the G are concerned. It's different, I think, different strokes for different organizations.
Okay, Tim, come on into the picture. It's still this idea about implementing ESG for the charity sector, but I just want to add on another spin to this, because I'm also hearing in terms of the cost of compliance or the cost of implementation. Some would argue that perhaps the bigger charities will be more equipped because they've got a little bit more resources versus the smaller charities who may have fewer resources relative to the larger ones. So when you look at this sort of as a whole in terms of implementation of ESG practices for the charity sector, how do you see things panning out? Will there be a different approach for charities big and small, or should there be a sort of a one-size approach?
I don't think there should be any difference, but I will pick on the ESG part on the S. I think one of the big difference between us and the for-profit or the corporate world is that we should be running ourselves out of a job. We should be working towards closing us down because we exist because of a social gap and something that we need to do. And you take NKF, we are known as the largest dialysis provider. And when we talk to our staff about it, they're not proud to be the largest dialysis provider because they say we have failed. Why are there so many people with kidney failure? And actually, we have now gone to donors who have donated money for dialysis center, and we shared with them the problem. And they said the money could be better used to prevent people from getting kidney failure rather than treating them for kidney failure. So the S part, as far as they are concerned, is not about what you do now, is how you go upstream. So this is the part where ESG is not a buzzword that we use, but I think as Wei talks about the social impact. Do we do it to make a difference, or do we do it to perpetuate ourselves? That is an issue we struggle with. But you talk about E, now that's a scale issue. Although we are the largest in Singapore, we went to a ministry and they said, as far as water consumption is concerned, you are very small because you're spread across the whole of Singapore. Now, how do we overcome some of these issues? And being medical, everything is dictated by regulations, and it's plastic and it's all those other stuff. And these are innovations that we are also encouraging companies who are supplying us with equipment to start looking at how we can use materials, resources more in a better way than rather than use and throw. In a medical field, you have no choice. But is that something we do or something we will partner? And this is where we are looking at partnering with farmers, with medical suppliers to start the ball rolling. Governance, I think, is too much has been said. I'm not going to say that. It's a bane in a lot of charities, but we live with it, and I think we have to accept it.
Okay, I want to put another question onto the screen in just a second, and this is, I think, related to Wei Li's presentation, where you talked about both the business continuity risk and also the ERM. So this is a question that has got quite a number of votes that I thought we might get a perspective from you in terms of where should the priorities be, ERM or BCP, or both?
My answer will be both, because ERM is correlated to business continuity. It's like, how do you want to manage, or it's a corrective action to a risk that's been identified. So that's how we usually define from a technical point of view, meaning to say that, for example, like if we have a crisis that, okay, I rewind back to identifying the whole risk universe. So as part of the process of identifying risk, you identify key events, like, for example, adverse event like a COVID situation. So one of the ways to respond to a situation like COVID or in future pandemic, it's what kind of measurements or business, what kind of practices do you need to put in place so that my operations can continue? So if you flip the whole BCP into a layman's definition, you understand what I'm trying to say, that both of them are correlated. First, we identify what are areas that will derail us. Then we'll put in practices to help us to respond to this situation. That's why I say we do it together. It's never one that is more important than the other, but it's more of the sequence. We always do ERM first, then we do BCP. It's just like earlier, we have so much conversation on the whole AML risk. So one of the corrective responses on AML, other than going through, just now I mentioned about due diligence, is also on crisis comm. So in the event that if you are one of the charities that it's been asked to do more, do you have a drawer statement to communicate to your respective stakeholders, including your donors, on what's happening? So this is what we meant by crisis comm, which is also part of the entire business continuity program. I hope I answered the question.
Okay, Tim, your perspective.
Okay, I will just pick on the word BCP. We learned from COVID the importance of BCP, but we also learned something about BCP. It is not about our organization. I think NKF learned during COVID that we had to set up a center to be used by other organizations and for-profit organizations coming to the center to use BCP. So we learned that you can't just look after yourself when you think about BCP. And this is where, when we did open a center to receive all COVID cases for dialysis, I think I'm very happy and very proud of my people that they didn't ask about costs. They didn't ask about, am I going to get overtime running this center? But the benefits of all that is MOH came in and funded that center after it was set up. So I think I'm very proud of my staff picking up and seeing BCP as not, why am I helping somebody else's patients? Why am I doing this? And actually, when we asked for people to volunteer for this BCP site, I think we had an overwhelming response. So I think don't underestimate your staff in understanding BCP, because we are all in the giving sector, and they want to give, and they must know why they are in this sector.
I see Greg nodding a lot. I think you want to add on to this conversation.
I did want to add to this. You know, I think essentially, I mean, I look at it simplistically, but I think BCP is part and parcel of the analysis for ERM, so the larger encompasses the lesser. But more critically, I think all of us have had, you know, the recent memory of COVID. And, you know, I think for me, I was really proud of the Pro Bono SG team and the way that in the COVID year, we were able to pivot online a number of services, and instead of seminars, webinars, instead of physical on-site clinics, pivoting swiftly to online, and it was done very seamlessly. And so I think the question of BCP is something acute that, you know, we all need to be mindful of. We need to ask ourselves questions such as, you know, are we still doing what is mission critical? You know, what we have a niche expertise in? What is our unique value proposition? A good question to ask ourselves is, if we close down, who will miss us? You know, and also think about it from the wonderful example that Tim shared about, you know, collective impact, and not just with non-profit, but also with for-profit. How can you impact? How can you move from, you know, outputs to outcomes to impacting that entire sector?
Okay, Hean.
Yeah, okay. I see BCP as an extension of ERM. Of course, the basics of ERM tells us which are the key risks that we have to prepare for. And with that, you may also have plans, mitigation plans. And in the worst case situation where services and systems are disrupted, you then have your BCP, the business continuity plan, that you can then pull out and execute. But in many of these initiatives that we see that are put in place, I think what is important is not just the documentation, the reporting, but the practice of it. So if you do have a ERP, ERM, and you do have certain mitigation plans, then do you exercise it? Do you sit down with the board, the staff, and have a tabletop discussion? Or do you do a full-fledged exercise? If you have a BCP plan, what is in your plan? And do you put it to practice? Because if something is just on paper or in our mind, then it is not very helpful at all. And it is really the practice. And again, it reminds me of the team today that we talk about, the focus on practice and impact. So it is really quite essential that something like the ERM and BCP is practice. And earlier we talked about the survey findings on ERM, when we talk about organization reporting to their board. Again, it's not just reporting. What is the substance behind that reporting process? Do the board and the management sit down and actually discuss the key issues? Do they look at ERM and say, does this fit into our strategies? Is there anything we need to do, by way of practical action? And that's important. Otherwise, it remains as just a talk and maybe filling up of checklists. So it's important to focus on practice.
All right. Folks, we have just about 2 minutes left to this conversation. So I'm just going to end off by asking each of you for one key takeaway, one key thought you'd like to leave our audience today with on this whole theme about managing risks in a changing world. If we were to give them one takeaway today, what will that be? Maybe we'll start with Wei.
Okay, I'll start with saying that again, managing risk is a journey. So 7 years ago, we know our risk. Where we are today is we know a little bit about how to manage risk. So hopefully 7 years later, we can actually use risk management to create the whole value itself. So it's looking at more of the upside of the risk itself. So thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, we hope your next study is not in 7 years' time, but maybe in 2 years' time. I'll ask Hean, and then I'll come back to the gentleman here. One key takeaway.
On risk...
on managing risk in a changing world. Okay,
on managing risk, I would say it's both theory and practice. Theory is what, in a setting like this, we talk about, and we learn the theory from the handbooks, the checklists, the survey findings, and we ought to be well-grounded in the theory and the understanding of risk management.
All right,
but we need to go beyond that to practice. Okay. And
to go beyond that is a different conversation, which we'll continue in a while. Tim, one key takeaway.
I think it's about mindset. Risk is all our problem. It is not just the staff hired to do risk and that's their problem. I think we all accept that we all are managing risk. It will nip the problem in the bud early.
Greg?
Okay, so I'll leave this thought with us. Identify insightfully, avoid assiduously, and manage masterfully. So identify insightfully because you need to know your bigger risks, your more grave risks, and your short-term risks as well, and avoid assiduously through the various mechanisms you have in your charity, whether it's the board, the ARC, or the staff, and manage masterfully when you actually have a risk eventuating.
Okay, always difficult to call a great conversation to an end, but, folks, thank you very much, and please join me to thank Hean, Tim, Greg, and Wei for sharing their thoughts. Thank you very much.